All right, hello everyone. This is SRC 543, covering something a little different and a little bit of the same here. I do a decent number of card games, baseball card games, a few Japanese baseball video games here and there. So I wanted to bring this up, one, because it's kind of an interesting intersection between all these different interests I have, and two, this is actually a pretty significant development, at least in the sports and baseball TCG space. And to get into that, let me give you a little bit of a background. So, Dream Order is arguably the first major baseball TCG project in nearly 20 years, and that's really not an exaggeration. There's been small projects like Topps' little attempts with their MLB Topps Attacks label, who both haven't been particularly successful and also just have been mostly pretty simple and only vaguely have trading card game elements. Like only the 2011 edition even has a deck, for instance. But really, since MLB Showdown ended in 2005, it's mostly been radio silence on this front of baseball trading card games. Even in Japan, where both baseball and trading card games are both hugely successful, the baseball trading card game genre itself has just kind of disappeared. Even Konami, who had their hands in several TCGs of their own, like I guess the Power Pros card game would be their most recent example in around 2005. They kind of instead focused on Baseball Heroes and Baseball Collection, which are just arcade games that feature collectible cards that just enhance player performances and aren't really trading card games in themselves. So after that long dry spell, it seems like that will finally come to a a blazing halt, this 420, April 20th, 2024. Bushiroad, so they're like the publisher behind pretty successful games that have been around for a long time, like Cardfight Vanguard and Vice Schwartz. This is like a pretty big label that's not messing around. They announced the release of their new baseball trading card game, Dream Order, like I don't know, a week or two ago. And this was headed by a 1-hour presentation which featured a 29-year veteran pitcher by the name of Masa Yamamoto, or Masa-san as they called him, which is honestly pretty cool. He's like the oldest player to ever win a baseball game, or at least Japanese player. And he's a screwballer, which basically don't exist in American baseball anymore, so kind of a rad dude. Even says he's a nerd, even though he's like 58 years old. So, yeah, kind of neat they brought him in the presentation. So, this presentation was kind of fun. Gave some details on the game's roster construction and basic game flow, though the full rules and other crucial details were a little scarce and still kind of remain behind the curtain. But still, just because there have been so few Japanese or even American baseball trading card games, I really wanted to cover this, especially since no English outlets are really going to look at a project like this. And I wanted to kind of preview what Bushiroad had to offer here and kind of overanalyze the little scarce details that they revealed so far, and from like an advanced baseball perspective. So anyway, like, we'll scroll through this page a little bit. Like many baseball games before, this is all about making a roster of cards or players. And each roster starts with a starting lineup of 12 players, which is a little weird. You have 3 pitchers, a starting pitcher, a middle reliever, and a closer, but they're on your starting lineup. They don't come out of your deck. They are there. And obviously your starting lineup of 9 batters. Not sure how it works without the DH rule because the demonstration both had designated hitters, but anyway, I'll figure that out later. So you have 15 points to work with. A much more simple system than MLB Showdown for sure. Just very easy to count. You won't need a spreadsheet to figure out if you're under cost or not. You can just add everything up in maybe 10 or 15 seconds or so and call it good. So that's really nice. All the players come with a cost from, it seems, 0 to 3. So with a Stars and Scrubs build, you can have like 5 all-star players and a bunch of just average players at 0 cost. And what else? Oh, I definitely have to mention there's a cap on points spent on pitchers and hitters. So your pitchers cannot be more than 5 points total, and your batters cannot be more than 10 points total. So you really have to go for kind of a balanced lineup on both the pitching and batting end. Honestly, this isn't a huge deal. I think this is mostly just to prevent players from just like stacking their pitchers, because this will be primarily a 3-inning format, so your pitchers are generally going to get more action than your hitters. So by having a pretty strict salary cap on your pitchers, it kind of encourages you from not abusing them by having like 2 or 3 really dominating pitchers and a weaker lineup. All right, so the really cool thing about this salary cap system, which is kind of previewed on these helper cards, which I'll talk about later, is depending on your team build, you have a different amount of salary to spend. So if you're using players from a single team, you will get 15 points as denoted here. So if you're using all Yakult Swallows players, you have 15 points to access. Of course, 5 for pitchers and 10 for fielders. So honestly, that gives you a pretty narrow card pool, and your team probably won't be that great if you use players from the same team. But on the other hand, you can also build a team of all-stars, so all players from teams from the same league. That'll unlock you a lot of extra players to craft with for your deck, but your salary cap will be lower to 13. And while this doesn't seem like a big deal to me, because I assume well-optimized builds will mostly be all-star builds that utilize several different teams, this is really nice because it gives a slight handicap to newer players or just homers who like using players from their favorite teams. So if you really like the Swallows and you want to use all Swallows, you want to use a starter deck that has all Swallows, you'll probably be at a disadvantage, but you'll have 2 extra points here, so that'll help your player quality slightly to compensate. Alright, and once you have your starting 12 of 9 batters and 3 relievers, you also have to make a deck. And a deck is actually composed of 2 different types of cards. So MLB Showdown, you had basically a 60-card deck of strategy cards, and those were just like boosters, card draw, things like that. And this sort of has the same thing going with tactics cards. The 2 depicted here are the full swing and meat batting cards, meat being the common Japanese term for contact hitting or hitting for average. And that's kind of as expected, just cards to affect play, blah, blah, blah. But the interesting thing they do here is you can actually use batters from your lineup. You can also put these guys in your main deck as well. So these guys, they have support boosts to both contact and power for both offense, 8 attack points, and defense points. So for instance, you can use full swing to give your guy +3 power, or you can use this pitcher. I can't see his name from here, but we'll talk about him later. And he'll give you your guy +3 contact. This is kind of neat. It gives you a little bit of incentive to collect more player cards, MLB Showdown, it really required you to have an astronomical amount of strategy cards, which weren't all that fun to collect, frankly. And since you can pad out your deck with a bunch of player cards in addition to these strategy/tactics cards, it makes the game a little bit more collectible. And the other cool thing is these also kind of serve different roles. Since the player cards tend to have multiple different boosts they can offer, while these, at least these presented tactics cards, they tend to be more narrow, but also higher in effect as well. That 1 point might not seem a lot with the utility you're giving up, but 1 point is really a lot in this game, since most boosts are only going to be 2 or 3. Alright. Oh, and one other really neat thing about these player cards in your main deck. Whenever you play one from your hand, sometimes they'll have a special effect if you have that card in your starting lineup. Some of them are pretty simple, like the Awakening ability will give you a slight boost for a certain stat if that batter is currently batting, so you can have your batter back up himself with a support bonus, a fatter support bonus. Or even on defense, there's a couple players that have the double play ability, which is obviously extremely powerful if you can pull it off. So that gives you the opportunity to really shine using some of the defensive players that aren't particularly strong at batting. They can not only provide good support boosts for your pitcher or batter, but they can also pull off a double play in a sticky situation, so to speak. And one last thing that I should mention about these decks, the main deck is 30 cards and the starting lineup is 12 cards, combining for 42. It's a pretty small main deck, but there is a limit to 4 cards between both decks together. So if you're going for like a big juicy double play or fat juicy Awakening support boost, you're only going to be able to have 3 of that play in your main deck. So it's going to make it a little trickier to line up as opposed to just using a tactics card outright, since you can have 4 of these since they're not going to be in your starting order. Alright. Let's talk about the game flow a little bit. So, of course, this is a battle between batter and pitcher. And I kind of alluded to these stats before. You have attack power for the batter and defense power for the pitcher. And unlike, say, MLB Showdown, you're not rolling a die to determine who wins the matchup here. The matchup is all about whether your batter's attack power is higher than your pitcher's defense power. And that is fully determined by the card on the board and the supports you play from your hand. So that might make you think that, like, wow, this is a really low variance game. Like the good players are just gonna beat up the bad players all the time. Well, there's actually a little bit of a slick thing Bushiroad did here. So when you're batting, you can choose to either bat for power or bat for contact. And this is a secret until the winner is determined. So if the batter, for instance, juices up his steroid reference not intended, juices up his power stat, and the pitcher goes all in on defending against contact hitting, the batter is almost certainly going to win. So not only does this give weaker players a chance if your opponent guesses way wrong, but it also really gives some interesting game theory situations and some calculus you'll need to make in your head as you're playing this game. So if you have a really obvious situation, like you're down by 3, the bases are loaded, and you have a power hitter up, it's game theory optimal. Well, it's theoretically optimal that a power swing is the way to go every time because you need that home run. But on the other hand, your opponent's going to be expecting that home run. They're going to be lining up outfielder cards to boost their player's power defense so they can win the matchup. So on one hand, that home run would be extremely valuable. But on the other hand, if your opponent expects it, it's going to be trickier for you to win the matchup. So there's a lot of opportunities to kind of do fades and stuff to kind of trick your opponent and kind of picking the suboptimal choice just to improve your batting average to improve your batting average and your success rate over time, basically. So a little bit of trickiness there. I'm still not exactly sure how the support system works, if you can play multiple ones per turn or if it's one per turn. If you can play multiple per turn, that will definitely favor the hitter, since you'd be able to stack up multiple cards on the same stat and your opponent would have to put in a lot just to keep pace and they lose multiple cards if they're wrong. But yeah, I'm kind of rambling on a little bit. I will say one thing that helps the pitchers in this favor, even though they're kind of at the disadvantage on all this guesswork they'll have to do to prevent the hitter from getting base hits. They generally have higher base stats than the batter will. So most batters will have an AP or attack points of 4 to 6. The pitchers I've seen revealed so far are in the 5 to 7 range. So they're not just dead to rights here if you guess wrong, so to speak. And that also brings me to the results table, which I kind of previewed earlier. In this game, whenever you lose the matchup as a hitter, it's an automatic strikeout, so you don't need to worry about that. But then, kind of like in MLB Showdown, if you win the matchup, you get to roll dice to determine what the result is. In this case, you'll actually roll 2 dice, which kind of replicates Takara's famous baseball card game in Japan, which ran for a couple decades from the 70s to 90s. Again, that was more of a management game and not really a trading card game, so to speak. It didn't have a main deck, but it was a huge success in Japan. So some players that might remember that, including this game's designer. Anyway, here's the results chart. We have the contact chart. If you win, looking at these numbers, you are very, very likely to get on base. All you need is a 5 or higher. And if you roll an 11 or 12, you even get a double. And on the power end, it's a little bit sketchy. You do have a pretty good shot at a double here, and you might even get a home run, but you're going to get out like maybe 40% of the time, which feels kind of bad when you just beat your opponent in the matchup and you're expecting a big hit. So this is another thing that also kind of goes in the pitcher's favor. Even if you guess wrong, sometimes the dice will bail you out and you'll be fine. Anyway, there's a little bit more math involving this. I'll go into that in a moment here. I just want to talk about one last game mechanic before moving on to the analysis and the card previews, and that's the time points. So time, basically just short for timeout, I think. These are just like tokens you have. They don't start in your deck, and they have they're all the same. They have various artworks. You can get mascots as a promotion. The most common ones will just be team logos. You start out the game with 5 of these, and every time you need to make a substitution, I assume mainly this will be for relief pitchers, but maybe pinch hitters or defensive substitutes will have some role in the game. You will need to spend one of your 5 points to make that substitution. In addition, it's also kind of a resource because certain players, they can consume a time point or two to increase their stats for a given at-bat. So I'm assuming that you'll probably need to save a few of these just for substitutions, but you'll also want to incorporate a couple of those hitters in your lineup to make sure that you're taking advantage of all 5 points there. Because, I mean, what's the point in just hoarding a bunch of resources at the end and never using them? I mean, we do it in every RPG ever, but in a card game, you'd rather not do that. Alright, anyway, I think that's kind of covering the basics. Let me switch windows here and kind of show you this spreadsheet I made on math. Once I get out of full screen here. So this is kind of a spreadsheet I made just to estimate run value above outs based on one, your type of swing, and two, the modifier on that swing. One thing that I don't think I mentioned earlier is players, either by a special ability or just like as an innate attribute, have modifiers to their rolls. So a really good power hitter might have +2 on their rolls here. And that has a significant effect on the run expectation. Oh, not quite doubling it as opposed to a +0 roll. But man, if the bases are empty and it's a neutral situation, you're expected to score one more run than with an out with a +2 power roll. So this is pretty game breaking. And on the other hand, negative modifiers on your power swings are very, very bad for you. So like if you're eating a -2 roll modifier, this is like worse run expectation than before the at-bat even took place. On the other hand, when you're hitting for average, since there aren't as many outs on the outcomes board and there's also not any home runs, there's not that big of a difference between modifiers here. So when we're evaluating cards, you really want to prioritize batters that have increased power rolls, and when you see an increased contact swing roll, it's a nice little bonus, but isn't really a game changer as far as that card's production goes. And that same thing goes for pitchers. They're going to be really effective against power swings if they reduce your opponent's roll for power swing. So if you're facing like a ground ball pitcher that's going to lower your rolls, it's usually going to be safer to do a contact swing as opposed to a power swing. And again, you can also kind of incorporate this into like the game theory I was talking about earlier. Is sometimes a suboptimal thing is going to be less predictable, and you'll have to include that in your calculus when you're making determinations where to swing for power or to swing for contact during your games. All right, I hope this is mostly making sense so far. Let's go into the cards spoiled so far, and I'll kind of evaluate what I think of them just from a mostly guessing lens, but there's some logic behind it, I guess. All right, 1 second here. Let me get my spreadsheet out with the English translation. These are machine translated, so I have the player names right, and I think I mostly have these stats right, but the abilities take with a grain for salt, because I'm like half guessing on these. First up, we have the Lions shortstop, Sosuke Genda. Excellent fielder. He played for the World Baseball Classic, so you might know his name from there. He is a 3-cost. All these players revealed so far are super rares, and most of them come in the starter deck, so they won't be too hard to get. But they will cost you a lot of points, so you'll have to factor that into your roster construction. I assume for teams focusing on rostering players from a single team, these guys will all be like must-haves because their player pools are so limited. But as far as the all-star team constructions go, where you can have any player from the same league, from Central League or Pacific League, whichever one you choose, these players might not be as good. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Anyway, back to Genda. He's a shortstop. His attack points are 5. Kind of on the lower end for a 3-cost card. Kind of average end overall. He has some pretty good support boosts when you're playing him from your deck. Contact +3. Contact +3 attack. And 4 defense against contact hitting, which I believe is as high as it goes. So lots of value coming out of your hand, it seems like. And he also has a passive boost of +1 to contact rolls. So if he can win the matchup with his 5 points, he is going to get on base at a pretty decent clip, though he's not going to do a ton of damage like the power roll boosted players will. Anyway, kind of average player so far. Good boost, high cost, medium hitting ability. The calling card behind Sosuke Genda is his defensive support ability. So if he's in your starting lineup and he's in your hand, you can use this card anytime that's applicable. So when your opponent rolls a contact swing and they make an out, the runner on first is also an out. So basically a double play ball. It's going to be difficult to kind of force this because your opponent's both going to have to choose the contact option, is going to have to roll, and he's going to have to lose the roll. But obviously 2 outs on one player is a big game changer. And as far as I know, at least from these abilities so far, most of the players don't have defensive abilities that make extra outs. So really, even though this guy's kind of expensive and doesn't hit well, he still might be a premium card if contact hitting tends to come out a lot. And he can draw extra outs, maybe with a pitcher that can reduce your opponent's rolls, or maybe an effects card that can, or a tactics card that can also reduce your opponent's rolls. So I'm kind of interested in this card. I don't know if he'll be super great, but clearly he seems to have some sort of niche going on there. Next up, we have the Nippon Ham Fighters pitcher. And this is Hiromi Ito. So this is a pretty standard pitcher card in this cost tier. We see a few other pitchers of the stat line. He's a 3-cost. He has 6 defense points. If he has to bat, he has 3 attack points, which honestly is pretty bad, but he might get a hit every now and then if you guess correctly, or if your opponent guesses incorrectly and you have a good boost card. So worth noting about this guy, he does have pretty good supports for both ends of contact. All infielders, the pitcher and the catcher, boost meet or hitting for average on the defensive end. So not super niche on that part, but still more numbers are good. And let's talk about his special ability to, if you do not play a player card, I believe, he gets DP +1. So this can give you a fighting chance against weaker hitters if even if you don't have a suitable support card for him, can bump up his DP to a 7. And you might get a lucky out every now and then. I'm hoping the way I'm reading this effect will work even if you use a tactics card and you don't play a player card, but I could be misreading it. So anyway, he seems fine. If he works with tactics cards like I think he does, he is effectively a 7 DP starting pitcher, which is pretty solid, and he does have the starter +7. I'm not sure what that means, but it seems to be above rate. Most of these guys have +6. So maybe that will let him stay in the game for an extra at-bat or something. Not really sure, but he's a card. Not super exciting, but he's a card and he seems playable in this pool of 13 cards I have. Next, we have the Eagles. Hideto Asamura. Second baseman, a very good hitting second baseman. Not sure if he cracked the World Series Baseball or World Baseball Classic roster or not. But anyway, he's a 3 cost. He has 6 attack power, which is a little bit higher than some of the other middle infielders we have access to in the game. Though his support bonuses are also a bit on the low side, with 2 AP and 2 DP on that front. Though his boost for AP is in power, so if you're looking for a power boost, could be useful for that. Anyway, I actually really like this player. One, he has a boosted power roll, which not all of the players have. A lot of them have a boost in contact, which seems to be slightly less effective looking at my odds on my spreadsheet. And the other thing is he has a really cool ability. Reads, if your opponent's pitcher is cost 3 or greater, attack power +2. So that boosts him all the way up to an 8. And that gives him a really good chance to win with a decent support card, even if your opponent guesses correctly. He has boosted power on top of that. So this seems like a pretty potent offensive option, and you can even play him at second base or even DH if you really wanted to. So, seems like a neat niche as a good hitting middle infielder or second baseman. And he might be a pretty good hitter on his own right. We'll have to see how the unspoiled or unrevealed players look later on. But if 3-cost starting pitchers are kind of the meta of this game, which I kind of predict they might be, this could be a very, very fine card. All right. Next up, we have the SoftBank Hawks. This is Yuki Yanagita, a really solid outfielder, and that's kind of reflected in his stats here. So another 3-cost, 6 attack power, so kind of a premium stat line there. He boosts your contact by 3, which is fine, and he's an outfielder, and he boosts your defense by 2 in power, which honestly probably a little bit on the low side, but since you can only have so many outfielders, it does seem those defensive power boosts do come at a slight premium. Anyway, he's another guy with a boosted power roll as a highlight in this thing here, and he also does have an ability. Let's see. We can consume a time point to give him +1 AP and also get an additional +1 roll when we make a power swing. So if we set aside some time points from him, obviously we'll probably need 1 or 2 for relief pitchers and maybe pinch hitters. He's a pretty potent threat at 7 attack power and also +2 rolls on the dice roll on that power swing. So I'm kind of excited about this guy. I assume there will be a plethora of good hitting outfielders to choose from. But this seems like he could be one of them. Unless, again, like unrevealed players are just like head and heels above these guys we've seen so far. All right, next up we have, let's see, this is a Marines player, Kazuya Ojima. This is a pretty standard pitcher from first glance. Another guy with that 3 cost, 6 DP, 3 AP stat line. And he gives you 2 support boosts and contact at an amount of 3. So I actually quite like this guy. His starting pitcher bonus is +6, which isn't too exciting, but when you look at his special abilities, it's kind of interesting. So during our opponent's hit check, or if they win the matchup and get to roll the dice, we get to subtract 1 from that amount. So that's really going to suck the air out of a lot of those power hitters because the rolls affect those outcomes a lot. It's going to be much harder to hit a home run off of them. So that's very solid to have around. I assume there will be other pitchers that also reduce batters' rolls, but this particular one seemed like a fine option. On top of that, he also has the Awakening ability. So if you play another copy of Ojima from your deck and support him with this one, not only will he get the +3 defense points from contact, he will get an additional defense point from contact. So that'll bump him all the way up to 10 defense points against contact hitters. So it kind of gives him like a neat little toolbox to face batters of both types. Against contact hitters, he can have a very high amount of defense points, and against power hitters, he can reduce their rolls and kind of decrease their power and make it more likely for them to fly out. So I don't think this will be like the most powerful pitcher in the league or anything, but he certainly has things going for him, and I'll be interested to see how he compares to the other guys as more cards come out. All right, last up we have our last Pacific League card. So these are all cards you could use on the same team, granted that you don't overdo it on the salary obligations. You are capped at 13 if you use players of the same league. All right, this is a Buffalo pitcher, Hiroya Miyagi. So this guy pretty much has the exact same stat line as the other guy, 3 for 6'3". He does have a little bit less of a contact support boost on defense, so that's worth keeping an eye on. Though it is worth noting his support ability is a little bit intriguing. I believe it reads, whenever your opponent rolls, subtract 1 from the roll for each card in your support area. So I don't know if this implies that you can play multiple support cards, or if this is usually just going to be 1 or 0. But either case, this reduces rolls for both swing types, it seems. And in the case that you can stack them, even if you guess wrong on whether your opponent's going to swing for average or for power, they're still going to get a pretty hefty decrease in their roll amount if you play multiple support cards and guess wrong. So that could definitely come in handy. This will maybe be a little bit like the previous card, Ojima, where you kind of play a bunch of contact defense cards, and even if things go wrong, you can really reduce your opponent's power and maybe get a flyout. Have to see how that plays out, but seems like a pretty fine pitcher that has pretty good answers to both hitter types. Next up, we have a Dragon card. This is a pitcher for the Chunichi Dragons. Little bit of buzz as a future major leaguer. Definitely not this year, but maybe he'll be posted in a future year. This is Shinozuke Ogasawara. And again, pretty standard stat line. 3 for 3/6. 3 support on both stats. +6 starting, whatever that means. So this is another role reducer, which seemed like a pretty strong effect to have on these pitching cards, and it's probably gonna be worth paying 3 costs in order to utilize. The cool thing about this guy's Ogasawara's ability is it isn't a flat bonus. If there's a runner on first, he reduces the roll by -1. But if there's a runner in scoring position, he reduces that roll by 2, which seems huge. So if you want a guy that can like really reduce your vulnerability to grand slams, Ogasawara really seems like your man, and seems like he could really come in the clutch and get some extra outs that a normal pitcher wouldn't be able to do. So stat line is whatever, but ability, kind of curious about this guy. I think he could play pretty strong. And again, could be a future major leaguer. We'll see. All right, another World Baseball Classic. Sometime starter. He might have been a platoon guy at second base with Maki. This is Tetsudo Yamada, the second baseman for the Yakult Swallows, and one of the better players in the league, at least when he was younger. I'm not sure he still is now. It seems like he's another defensive specialist. He's a middle infielder. He costs 2. Second base, seems like he's only second base eligible. His attack power is 5, which is a little bit on the low side for a guy that's this expensive. He does have one thing going for him, and he does have some great support boosts. So +3 for contact on offense and +4 to contact on defense. And also his roll boost is +1 to power, so he does have a little bit of pop if he can win that matchup. So the thing I don't love about Yamada, despite his roll boost, is his ability seems super situational. Whenever you're losing, you boost his attack power by 1, which brings it up to a 6, which is like, It's pretty good. It's pretty good considering his defensive stats. But you're only going to be losing a minority of the time. And if you're losing a lot, he's probably not going to be good enough to save you. Let's be honest. So he doesn't get cool double plays like some of the other defensive specialists can do. And he's not really quite the offensive threat that the offensive leaning players can be. So I feel like Yamada, as good as a player he is, this might be one of the weaker cards in the first set as far as the starter deck foils go, which is too bad because he seems like a great player. Anyway, next up we have another potential future major leaguer and also World Baseball Classic player. We have Kazuma Okamoto, a first baseman for the Yomiuri Giants. So another very obvious offensive card. And I kind of love him because he's really straightforward, but he's also pretty powerful. So you got the 3 cost, 6 attack power stat line. Kind of meager boosts on the support end. You might not want to include a lot of copies of him in your main deck if you can help it. +2 attack to power and +2 defense to contact. But the cool thing about him is he has the full +2 swing bonus to power on every at-bat, and you don't need to consume any points or have any certain cards in your hand or anything. He is just always getting +2 on that power roll. So on one hand, he's a little bit predictable. You'll have to use contact swings on occasion with him, which just to keep your opponent on their toes, which isn't ideal. But on the other hand, this guy has got some serious power, and he could be a great candidate as a number 3 or 4 hitter in this first series of cards. So, seems like he'll be a fun guy to use, and hopefully we see him in Major League Baseball someday. All right, we got 3 more here. So, of the Yokohama Bay Stars, we have Keita Sano. I think that's how you say it. And this guy is a weird one. He really isn't anything like any of the other players that have been featured in these previews. So he's a first baseman, and he only has 5 attack power, so he's only hitting about as well as our middle infielder is revealed here, which isn't all that impressive at all, to be frank. It is worth knowing he does have pretty good support bonuses here, +3 attack power to meet, +3 defense power to meet or contact. What's neat about Sano is he's kind of a high roller in that he has boosts to both contact and to power if he wins the matchup and manages to roll the dice, which is kind of neat because it makes him less predictable and also makes him pretty good on both ends, whether you need him to just get on base or to get a power swing. Not quite as impressive as Okamoto with just +2 power outright, but I do like the unpredictability aspect he brings to the table. And he even has a support ability to kind of double down on his high rolling. And that is his awakening ability. If you have another copy of Sano from your hand and play him while he's batting, he gets +2 to his roll. So you'll probably be hitting for contact with him. And that's a good 8 points. So, you're definitely not guaranteed to win the matchup. But with that +3 boost to roll on contact, oh man, he is almost certainly getting on base, which is really kind of exciting. And if there's a way to play multiple support cards and switch to power, which I hope works, but I could be wrong. If he gets +3 power boost, if you awaken him, that is absurd. And that'll make him a significant home run threat. And if he's going to have trouble winning the matchup at a base attack power of 5. This is a very interesting card for sure. Doesn't play anything else like any of the other offensive players. I'm not exactly sure if he's good or not. Part of that will depend if the game mechanics work in a way that he's able to get his awakening boost on a power swing. That'll be to be determined, but he's certainly very interesting. Not just a numbers guy, but as a guy that can really increase your dice rolls. Next up, we have all defensive specialist in real life, Rosuke Kikuchi. No relation to the Kikuchi currently on the Toronto Blue Jays. I believe that's Yusei Kikuchi. Anyway, Kikuchi is just the same player as Sosuke Genda of the Lions. He is in the other league, though, so if you do need a double play defensive specialist and you're playing the Central League deck as opposed to the Pacific League deck, he is kind of your guy. And I also love the sick photograph of him. Very cool looking play there. Anyway, not much to say. Defensive specialist, huge boosts. Not too much of a hitter, but he can get those double play balls, so worth looking out for if you're making a Central League deck. One of the last hitters we have is a Tiger, and this is Yusuke Oyama, a first baseman. Another pretty straightforward guy, 6 power. He only gives you a +2 boost to power, which I guess is fine. Power is a little bit rare of a boost on these player cards, but he does give you a full +3 to contact on defense, which isn't as good as a middle infielder or a pitcher can provide, but that does seem to be a little above rate for a first baseman. So he does have a little bit of value as a defensive guy. He also has +1 power on his roll, which isn't as impressive as Okamoto, but good to have. I think it's better for him to have that than contact, just because power boosts tend to be a little bit more potent based on how the rolls work. Anyway, Oyama's ability isn't super flashy. It's Awakening. Attack power +1. So if you play another copy of him from your hand, you can boost the attack power by 1 more than usual. So if you play him on himself, you can get up to 9 attack power, which is going to win some amount of the time on a power swing. And he's going to roll the dice with a +1 bonus on top of that. So I don't know if he's exciting as Okamoto, but he does have some things going for him, and I could see him definitely being a consideration for a Central League power guy. All right, and those are all the 12 starter deck guys. Definitely some interesting players. Obviously, it could be that the booster pack rares are just more powerful, and these guys are just kind of all scrubs. But if they balance them out pretty well between the booster cards and these cards, there seems to be some pretty compelling guys in here. A couple good pitchers, some good offensive threats. It seems like most of these guys at least have like an argument to be viable within themselves, except for Yamada. Seems like he's kind of caught between not really providing a ton of value on offense or defense, which is a little bit awkward. But anyway, these are parallels. The normal cards do not look like this. They have a normal regular photograph, so like the baseball field and dirt and grass will be behind Kikuchi in the normal card as depicted here. There is a very small chance that a starter deck will replace your normal super rare card as depicted here with a special super rare card as depicted here. So this adds a little bit of a chase element to the starter decks to ensure they get opened, because besides that, all of the player cards are fixed and they're all commons. So, hey, maybe the chance of getting a really cool super rare parallel like this will make them a little bit more enticing, even if you're not a beginner. Also, we have one more bonus preview. This is a super special rare, I believe. This one actually has a autograph on it. It's signed. I don't know if this is like an official on-card autograph that's authenticated or if it's just part of the artwork or what, but it looks very cool, I think. And this card is of interest in that he isn't a starter deck card. So and it seems he's pretty mechanically unique from all the other cards featured. And he's even a catcher, and we haven't seen any other catchers yet, so we should definitely give him a quick look and evaluate him real quick. At first glance, he is a pretty typical power threat at 6 attack power and +2 power roll, which is honestly pretty exciting. He compares fairly favorably to Okamoto because he has some special abilities on top of that besides just that roll. His only real downside as far as stat line goes is his defensive stat line is pretty low, only +1 to contact in his boost, though his +2 to power on offense isn't bad at all. However, he actually has 2 abilities on top of that, which is kind of neat. First of all, he has the Awakening ability, +1 attack power whenever you play a copy of him from your hand onto this one. So he can get pretty big, and also has a +2 dice roll on top of that. So he can be a pretty significant power threat. Maybe even better than Okamoto. So even if you have a catcher you prefer on defense, which player is this? Tomoya Mori seems like a very real candidate to put in your designated hitter spot. And on top of that, he even has a slight boost to his defense through his ability. So he has a defensive support of +1 power DP. So if you play him from your hand, not only does he boost your contact by 1, but he also boosts your power by 1. So even though the boost is very small, it's spread across between 2 different stats. So he actually does have a little bit of defensive value because he does spread out your stats in a way that most cards seem like they're not able to do at this point. So obviously more of a DH, but the fact that he does potentially have a little bit of a defensive niche by covering both contact hitting and power hitting is a little bit fascinating to me, and I'm curious if that'll be relevant at all when considering rostering him. And we will also go over the tactics cards real quick. There are only 2 spoiled so far, but I assume this will be kind of a preview of the other ones. So Full Swing is a power hitting card that boosts your power by +3. And all the cards we saw can't boost power hitting by more than 2. So this is dead on defense. They can't enhance your contact hitting at all, but it seems like if you're utilizing at least a few power hitters, this will be a very good card to have early on, at least until better support or better tactics cards come out for supporting. The same can be said for meat batting or contact batting. +4 to contact well above rate. That's probably very playable, and you can have 4 copies of it in your deck if you want. Even if your opponent sees your contact hitting coming, with that +4 boost, it is going to be a little bit hard to beat. So both these cards seem like they could be pretty valuable, even though they're kind of narrow, and even though they're definitely less collectible than the player cards themselves. So definitely worth keeping an eye on these. There'll probably also be some defense boosting cards and maybe like a catch-all card in the future, or maybe even some deck and card manipulation. These cards will probably all be useful in some capacity, at least until better versions of them come out. So a lot of these will be commons. They won't be super flashy, but these will be good cards to have in your deck, I think. Anyway, that's it for my way too soon advanced so-called analysis based on way too many assumptions of Dream Order. Let me know if you liked the video, if you'd like to see more content like this in the future, and if you found this analysis interesting or perhaps helpful if you play the game in the future. Kind of close out by scrolling through some of the products. There is a starter deck for every team featuring one of the players that I was talking about earlier, featuring either the parallel or the regular super rare card. You also get every card and their starting order and 6 tactics cards to top it off. So there is decent value in these boxes just for MSRP of 1,500 yen. You don't get any dice, but you do get a little paper starting mat and some tokens to play with and a rule sheet. So not bad at all. And I could definitely see if you're just a casual player, just buying one of all the teams that you like and just using it as a board game. It would be kind of cool, and also kind of a callback to the Takara card games in the 70s through 90s that were all based on a single team. So there are 12 of these, a lot of different starter decks, way above what you would expect for a trading card game. But I think it is really cool that each team is represented, even the bad ones, even the less popular ones. And you do get a lot of players to play with. I would expect a lot of these players to be so-called vanillas, where they won't have special abilities and are basically just stats and costs. But still nice that everyone gets to be featured. The only thing I do not really like about these decks is the support cards or tactics cards are all the same 6/1s, which is good for a beginner since they don't need to read a lot of extra cards. But as a collector, it's kind of because that does leave you with a ton of doubles. Because otherwise with the player cards, you're only going to have 3 of each player, so you can include all of those in a deck, theoretically. But with 1 or 2 of each support card in every single deck, you're going to have more than the playset of each one, which is a little bit awkward. But if you're just playing the decks against each other, it's not a big deal. And we'll also talk about the booster packs briefly. A neat thing here is the most common roster constructions are going to be based on the league with the 13-point salary cap. So you'll have to choose between one of these 2 leagues when you're constructing a team. So you can pick your favorite one, or the one that contains your favorite team at least. And you'll be able to open cards that all can be included in your deck. So if you're building towards one type of team, you're never really drawing dead, so to speak. Unless you get all duplicates, of course. And each pack, pretty standard price and amount of cards in it. 8 cards, 1 pack for 400 yen. A box has 12 packs, and you can pick up a box for about 4,000 or 5,000 yen, so you can get one for like 25 or 30 bucks plus shipping, which is actually kind of cheap. I think if you're interested in collecting these, though of course shipping's got to be an arm and a leg when shipping from that far away. Looking at the basic rarities of the non-parallels, you will probably get around 1 super rare card per pack, around 2 rares per pack, and around 4 or 5 commons per pack. So you'll probably need to open around 4 boxes to get every card, which $100 per league, not the worst. To get a full playset of super rare cards or to get some of the parallels, you probably are going to have to open a lot more than that. So if you're a huge collector, definitely expect to buy some singles in order to finish your well-tuned deck or to finish your parallel foil collection. And that's kind of it really with what's been spoiled so far. There are some promo cards if you go to a How to Play event or if you attend a specially sponsored baseball game. And there's also some card sleeves and deck boxes, of course. But yeah, that's Dream Order card game. Those are my musings. Hope I didn't ramble too long, and I hope I mostly made sense and wasn't too repetitive. This is SRC 543 signing off, and thanks for watching if you made this far.